On today's World Insight, the U.S. kills a top Iranian general in Iraq. Is this a declaration of war? And misinformation on the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Can China reverse deep-seated perceptions from the Western media? Here's our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. We begin our show in the Middle East. The general and the leader of the elite branch of Iran's Revolutionary Guards was killed in a U.S. airstrike in Iraq on Friday. In fear of retaliation, the U.S. has urged all American citizens to depart Iraq immediately. Though the assassination was praised by U.S. President Donald Trump and Republican politicians, the targeted killing of Qassem Soleimani could draw forceful Iranian retaliation and spiral into a far larger conflict between the U.S. and Iran and possibly beyond. Take a look.
A U.S. rocket strike at Baghdad International Airport killed Iranian commander Soleimani. The Pentagon says that Trump ordered the killing and says the move was aimed at deterring future Iranian attack plans. Trump tweeted an American flag and seemed to give some hints. The Iraqi military says at least 8 people were killed in the attack, including Iraqi militia commander Abu Mahdi al-Muhand. The rockets landed near the air cargo terminal, burning 2 vehicles. Iranian Revolutionary Guard spokesman vowed that Iran would definitely retaliate against the U.S. airstrike. Our determination to retaliate against the criminal America and occupying Zionists is boosted, and it will definitely happen. The temporary happiness of Americans and Zionists will not last long and will soon turn into mourning. Last week, the U.S. launched airstrikes against Iran-backed militia, which killed 25 members. The U.S. said the airstrikes were in response to the killing of an American civilian contractor on an Iraqi military base. Iran has condemned them as support for terrorism. Iraqi Shiite militiamen and their supporters then stormed the U.S. embassy in Baghdad, setting fire to a reception area. Trump has warned Iran that he will hold it accountable if any lives are lost in attacks on U.S. facilities. Now the story is developing in this region and no one knows what will happen next.
We're going to have a panel of all stakeholders coming in later in our program. For now, I want to introduce to you 2 guests already with us right now. Fort Lauderdale, we have Ivan Eland, the Senior Fellow and Director of the Center on Peace and Liberty at the Independent Institute, join us from the U.S. And also in Beijing, Li Guofu, Director of the Center for Middle East Studies from China Institute of International Studies. Gentlemen, welcome to our program. I want to go to you first, Mr. Ivan Eland, about the U.S. issue. First of all, may I ask you if I could have a conversation with you first? That is, what do you think about Iran's vow to retaliate? And also, what does that mean for the U.S. immediate response in Iraq and also in the Middle East?
Well, I think Iran will make good on its plan. The Iranians are very crafty, they're indirect, and they're good at both bomb making and assassinations, and they're also good at cyber attacks. So it could be one of those 3 things, I would think, maybe something else, but certainly there will be retaliation. This man was very ruthless, but he has killed probably hundreds of Americans when the U.S. was in Iraq, and the United States is mad about him attacking U.S. Bases, or actually Iraqi military bases with U.S. contractors and personnel there, and they killed 1 contractor. That's what started it all in the near term.
Mr. Eland, the U.S. has done that, the assassination, without providing to the international community the evidence, so to speak, as to why this man is being targeted, only claiming to prevent attacks against the American soldiers there, according to the Secretary of State. But can we trust the U.S. given the earlier history of 2003 Iraq war, so-called weapons of mass destruction, eventually did not come true, Mr. Eland?
Yes, well, I think that's a legitimate question. I had that question myself. That this is they're always saying when they hit some leader or terrorists or whatever that they're planning future attacks, because that's done for domestic reasons, that they can justify taking action in self-defense, alleged self-defense, without congressional approval. And the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, has already criticized Trump for not getting any sort of authorization or any consultation with Congress before the strike, which is really against the U.S. Constitution. So that's why they do that. That's the reason that they say stuff like that. But I'm not sure I believe that either. I think the root of the problem here goes way back to the U.S. abrogating the Iranian nuclear agreement, and things have just gone downhill from there. The other problem is we have troops all over the Middle East, and Trump pledged to get rid of those, and so of course they are a target. I think the Iranians actually, this Soleimani was directing attacks at the U.S., but it's a problem with a larger problem. He's certainly a ruthless character, but this assassination is a major escalation, and it is essentially a declaration of war, and the Iranians will probably retaliate.
Okay, that is the American perspective. We're also joined right now from Iran, Professor Mohammad Marandi. He is from the University of Tehran. Professor Marandi, welcome to our program as well. You probably caught up the latter half of your colleague coming from the U.S. talking about his perspective. Now, let me ask you, who do you think to the Iranians Mr. Soleimani is? Of course, he's having tremendous impact in Iran's neighborhood. Now, losing him, what does it mean for the Iranian leader and also the Iranian impact in the region? Professor, briefly, please.
Yes, well, Iranians see him as a hero. He was a war hero when the United States supported Saddam Hussein in his invasion of Iran. He defended the country, and when the United States ruthlessly supported extremist groups in Syria alongside the Saudis and brought in tens of thousands of foreign fighters in coordination with regional countries to overthrow the government, it was General Soleimani and others who went and helped prevent Damascus from falling into the hands of those who carry the black flags. And General Soleimani himself, when Baghdad was about to fall, and we have to remember that the United States destroyed Iraq. They helped Saddam Hussein, then they turned against Saddam Hussein, they imposed sanctions and killed 1 million people as a result of the sanctions, then they lied and invaded the country and destroyed it.
Okay.
So when the spillover of the extremists that the Americans helped create in Syria went into Iraq, the Iraqis couldn't defend themselves. So General Soleimani and his troops went and fought themselves to prevent Baghdad from falling. So Iranians see him as a hero that prevented the region from collapsing into the hands of extremists. And the Americans have carried out an act of war, not only against Iran, by murdering a senior Iranian official, but also by murdering a senior Iraqi military official who was the deputy commander of the Popular Mobilization Forces. So the United States, which is acting with impunity, it's ignoring the Iraqi government. The Iraqi government ordered them not to attack their soldiers. They did, and now they've carried out an attack right inside the Baghdad International Airport. So the Iranians are outraged, Iraqis are outraged, and I think the Americans are going to have to pay a very heavy price.
A very heavy price. If I could use a quote from you, what exactly does that mean, Professor Marandi? Now, the Iranian leader also vowed that, together with 3 days of mourning for General Soleimani. What exactly does that mean in terms of Iranian actions? Now, many of us remember very clearly decades ago, the Tehran issue was something always in the memory between Iran and the United States. What's likely to be the action, if there were any, coming from Iran?
Yes, the Iranians have very terrible memories of the regime in Washington. The United States overthrew the Iranian government in 1953. They supported the Shah. They helped him put down tens of thousands of protesters. Then they helped Saddam Hussein, them and the Europeans gave Saddam Hussein chemical weapons. The United States has, been antagonizing the Iranian people for many decades, well before the revolution itself. But this is something different. The United States has targeted senior government officials with impunity, in full disregard of Iraqi sovereignty, in full disregard of the Iraqi government, and in a slap in the face both to the people of Iran and the people of Iraq. And we've seen protests today throughout Iraq that are outraged with the American attack. On CNN, they show a few hundred people who are former Ba'athist supporters of Saddam Hussein and ISIS supporters and American NGOs celebrating, but they don't show the footage of hundreds of thousands of people throughout Iraq that are protesting in outrage at the U.S. behavior. This is going to have consequences. The Americans can no longer sustain their troops in Iraq. They will not be tolerated. The Americans have behaved very foolishly and very aggressively and in a very barbaric manner. And the Iranians know that if they don't stand firm, if the Iranians and the Iraqis don't stand firm, the Americans will do to them what they did to Libya, what they did to Syria, what they did to Afghanistan, what they did to Iraq, and what they did to Yemen.
Okay. Now, we have heard both sides, from the U.S. side and also from the Iranian side. Now, of course, we need to talk to the Iraqi side. Before we get to our Iraqi guest, let's play a small story about who General Qassem Soleimani is. Let's take a look.
General Soleimani was Iran's most powerful military commander. He had led Iran's Quds Force since 1998, which is an elite unit in Iran's Revolutionary Guards and responsible for extraterritorial military and clandestine operations. Soleimani was also considered one of the closest people to Iran's supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. He rose through the ranks during the Iran-Iraq War between 1980 and 1988 and aided Afghan rebels along Iran's eastern frontier who were holding out against the Taliban. He was also involved in Iranian military activity in the Caucasus.
Okay, that's who General Soleimani is, the one who was assassinated by the U.S. today. And let's talk to, on the phone, from Iraq as well. The voice from Iraq is coming from Mazin al-Shaker, who is an economist and independent politician. He served as a special advisor to the Prime Minister and currently has the Inja Development Center, that is an economic policy center based in Iraq. Sir, welcome to our program. Now, I want to have also immediate response from your side about the latest situation, which started from the earlier U.S. attack against some of the forces in Iraq, which killed Iraqis, and then protests going on toward the U.S. Embassy. And after that, we saw the so-called U.S. retaliation against Iranian official as well as Iraqi official. Now, what's next for Iraq?
Well, thank you for the invite. It's a very important time, especially for the Iraqis. I heard the point of view of the people from Iran or from the United States. Iraq is a very weak country and it's trying to develop itself and rebuild itself. Most Iraqis do not want to be part of this game, the Iranian and the American game. Obviously, the Iraqis were very grateful that the United States helped remove Saddam Hussein, one of the worst dictators history has ever wrote. And today, Iraqis are in a very poor economic situation. They're not ready to start another war. Iraq has been in war probably for the last 3-4 decades. What happened between the United States and Iran on Iraqi land is something that Iraqis do not want to take part of. As far as General Soleimani, Iraqis are grateful for the help of the Iranians on the ground to fight ISIS, and very grateful to the United States for helping fight ISIS in the air. So both the Iranians and the Americans who helped Iraqis to fight ISIS. So Iraqis are grateful for that. As far as the most sentiment for Iraqis, as we know, there were hundreds of thousands, close to 1 million people who were demonstrating, and they had a sit-in in 16 cities in southern Iraq against the very, very corrupt government of Abdul Mahdi. Iraq is ranked 3rd or 4th most corrupt country in the world. And what we notice as Iraqis is that this government is very strongly affiliated with Iran. So
right.
in effect, most Iraqis believe that this corruption is because of the Iranian relationship with this government. So people are against corruption and against the government.
Okay, let me ask you, Mr. Al-Shaker.
Al-Shaker.
Yeah, thank you, sir. One of the things is that whether Iraq will continue to be, probably even in a deeper degree, as a place of proxy war between Iran and the United States with the latest incident. So what is likely to be the actions coming from Iraq to prevent that from happening? Is there anything that you can do?
Okay, so what we have in Iraq is, of course, the Iraqi government, the Iraqi army, and then we have this new thing called the Popular Mobilization Units. These were set up because of the war with ISIS, and there's two types of PMUs. The PMUs that are affiliated with the government, which are peaceful, and they take their orders from the prime minister. And then outside the PMU, there are these militias. These are out-of-control militias. They do not follow the orders of the prime ministers, but they are affiliated with Iran. So Iraqis can distinguish between the two types of PMUs. Obviously, most Iraqis support the PMU that fought ISIS to save Iraq. But the ones who are out of control, which we call the militias, are the ones who are very corrupt. They are involved in kidnapping, and they were the ones who were responsible for killing over 600 demonstrators, peaceful demonstrators, through snipers and through abduction and assassination. So most people can distinguish between the two types of PMUs.
There are a lot of mixed information, of course, coming in, and also in the arguments used by various panelists that are speaking to me today. Let me also go to another source, Mr. Li Guofu, coming from China. Of course, Mr. Li, China is not a direct party involved in this, but as a member of the Permanent Five of the Security Council, China certainly is responsible to ease the tension. So the spokesperson of the Chinese Foreign Ministry spoke out already today, calming down all sides. But what do you think will be the next step, Mr. Li?
I think, we are very much concerned about the developments and also the latest situation in the Persian Gulf, especially, I think, the escalating tensions between the United States and Iran. And as you say that, the spokesperson from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has already called all the relevant parties to exercise maximum restraint to prevent the escalation of tension in the Gulf. I think, I have been involved in the Middle East for many, many years. I think, the best thing for, the people in the Middle East, they have to, change the mindset, to respect the other sides rather than, always ask the other sides to consider their own security.
But of course, that's a long-time topic you have just said. But short-term, for example, we have seen the State Department coming from the U.S. tweeted about Secretary of State Pompeo's response recently on the media Friday morning, U.S. time, suggesting there were discussions with the Chinese side after the attack, and the U.S. expressed once again that it does not want to escalate the tension. That, of course, is according to the U.S. side. And later, we have also see some tweet coming from the U.S. president suggesting Iran never winning a war, but never losing a negotiation. It seemed to be very blurred in what he's trying to say. So with all of these mixed messages, Mr. Li, China being a party, try to calm down all party at a time of tension. What does it mean to China in terms of playing that role?
I think, we can play that role because we have good relations with the Iranian government, and the Iranian, the people, the government, trust very much about China. And, what you say that this is a very important message to show that, despite, the killing of the Major General of the Iranian and Soleimani, which is also very clear to show that, President Trump does not want to go to war with Iran.
Well,
and he was maybe, ask China just to pass this message, try to prevent any action taken by Iran, which would escalate the tensions.
Of course, this is interesting because once the message is being expressed through the media, it is already a message not according to the State Department to China, but the message to everybody, including to Iran. Professor Morandi, what do you think should be the things reading between the lines made by the Americans? Professor Morandi.
Well, one thing that I'd like to correct first is that the senior Iraqi official that was murdered was the deputy head of the Popular Mobilization Forces, and they're not divided into different groups. He was the deputy commander of the whole of the Popular Mobilization units, which fought and drove back ISIS. And these units had nothing to do with the attacks on innocent civilians, and that is what that's the American, Saudi, Emirati narrative. And I think in the coming days and weeks we'll see where Iraqi popular opinion stands. I think it'll become quite evident pretty soon. But the problem is that the Americans have committed an act of war. This is beyond any doubt. The Americans have murdered a high-ranking, it's as if the Americans murdered a high-ranking Chinese general, a commander of the Chinese armed forces. This is an act of war. They will have to pay the price. And when the Americans murder with impunity, if they do not receive a response, then they will do it again. And this is exactly why the Americans have destroyed so much of the region. So the Iranians know that they have no option but to stand firm. And the same is true with Iraqis. The Americans helped create ISIS. The Americans destroyed Iraq. And now the Americans are acting with impunity in Iraq, like a rogue regime. They are a rogue regime in Iraq. They will not obey the prime minister. They will not obey the constitution. They will not obey their own commitments, abide by their commitments. They attack Iraqi forces. The Popular Mobilization units that the Americans attacked a few days ago were 550 kilometers away from the nearest American base. They were on the border with Syria. The Americans killed those soldiers who were on the front line and fighting with ISIS.
Let me go
Why?
to you.
Because the Americans wanted to empower ISIS on the border between Iraq and Syria. So when the Americans behave as such, then Iraqis and Iranians have no option but to stand firm against the United States. And I think that this is going to ultimately lead to the withdrawal of U.S. forces from Iraq. And I think that people in the region, Westerners especially, in countries like the United Arab Emirates, which is aiding the United States in its aggression on Iran, had better rethink their situation, and they should probably leave these countries, because these American bases in the Emirates and elsewhere are being used against Iran, and this will not be tolerated under these circumstances.
Let me go to also, just to be fair, go to Mr. Eland as well from the U.S. side. Two questions related to your Iranian counterparts' remarks as well. One is whether U.S. troops are likely to stay or to leave, given the very mixed messages coming out of Washington over the past 1 year, particularly with the latest incidents. Secondly, everybody, if you look at the countries around, is back at home in terms of the leadership. They want to monitor very closely what's likely to happen next. So this is not just Iran and the United States. This is much bigger than that. Mr. Eland, do you think the political parties as well as the current administration are ready to handle the mess? Mr. Eland.
Well, unfortunately, I think the U.S. troops should have been pulled out before, and we wouldn't have this problem. But unfortunately, if the Iranians retaliate, then of course the U.S. digs in and says, well, we don't want to be seen as wimps. We're going to send more. We've already sent more troops to the region, and of course this is against Donald Trump's campaign promises to get us out of endless wars in the Middle East and also to get our troops home. So he's violating his own policy, and I think, yes, we're going to see escalation, and maybe that will lead to the eventual driving out of the U.S. forces. But the problem is it would have been better off to withdraw them before all this happened. And of course, we wouldn't have this problem in the first place if the troops weren't there. As far as the other, the domestic political landscape here, I think the Democrats, the opposition party, is criticizing not necessarily getting rid of Soleimani, but the way that this wasn't authorized by Congress, and also the fact that they could start a wider war, because this is, as my Iranian colleague pointed out, this is a drastic escalation. This is an assassination of a foreign leader, not the top leader, but a very high leader. And this breaks the international norm of not doing that, because this always ends badly. It's one thing to take out terrorists like Osama bin Laden or Baghdadi or whomever, but once you start bumping off high leaders, where does it end? They could do, Iranian could do that to our personnel in the region or in the United States.
And Mr. Lee, I also want to follow up about that. Of course, a lot of this has to do with the election politics. We do not want to be skeptical, but still, that is a reality there. So, Mr. Lee, what do you think into an election year, the relevant parties likely to react and escalate what is already happening? What would that mean for the fate of resolving the issue, or we're going to see very different direction of the whole thing?
I think, usually I think, during the year of elections, and the U.S. president would not like to go to war, especially, I think, the current President Trump, he had made promises to the American people. He would like to get these boys and girls back at home, and he was heated to go to another new war in the Middle East. But, the things is that, eventually, the Trump is regarded, is very crowded. He wants to be very strong in order to encourage, its regional allies to take some actions against Iran. So I think by, killing, the Major General Soleimani, this is another way to show that, he was, have enough guts to act in actions, and also ask the other, American regional allies to act in the same way.
Before we go, I do want to ask three of you, every one of you, give us 30 seconds, if you can, about what to do next in order to de-escalate the tension. After all, we want the tension to be de-escalated. I know the hatred is already rising, but still, can we hope that all parties be able to calm down? Let me go to you, Mr. Lee, first. Of course, China is not a direct party, so your thoughts, 30 seconds.
I think the source of recent tension was U.S. withdrawal from, the GCPOA, and also, impose the sanctions. If the United States could lift of some sanctions, especially the embargo of Iran oil export, that would be, reduce the tensions in the region.
And I'm not sure that's likely to happen in the immediate term. Mr. Eric Eland, your thoughts, 30 seconds.
Well, the root core of the problem is the sanctions and the Iran nuclear agreement, which Trump abrogated. And I think they need to find a face-saving way. He needs to find a face-saving way to restore that and put the relationship back on some sort of a footing. There will be retaliation, but after that, maybe they can open some sort of back channel to get the Iran nuclear agreement back into, good health.
All right. Mr. Al-Shaker, coming from Iraq, 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds, I'm very grateful that what happened in front of the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad did not turn out like what happened in Tehran in 1979. So setting up a new government in Iraq and renegotiating the terms of the SOFA agreement with the United States to have a more peaceful relationship with the United States and with Iran.
And last but not least, Professor Marandi from Iran.
The United States must withdraw its forces from Iraq before it's driven out.
As Simple as that. Thank you so much, gentlemen, coming over to our program. I know you have very different positions, but thank you for joining us at least for a civil discussion. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Bazin, Al Shaker, Mohammed Marandi, Ivan Eland, Li Guofu. Thank you.